I thought it would be good tonight to talk a little bit about Neil for maybe some of you who didn't have the opportunity to know him and why this award is the Neil Armstrong Award of Excellence. So it's a pleasure to be here tonight to recognize the recipient of this award, and though probably not necessary, to offer a few thoughts about the legacy of its namesake. So let's step back a little bit and think about that. Why, after all, is this award named for Neil Armstrong? So everybody in the audience is saying, well, who is this idiot? Neil, that's a stupid question. Anybody knows the answer. Neil was the commander of Apollo 11 and the first human to set foot on the moon. And what more do you need? But we should think about that just a little more. Being first is logically irrelevant. And when I was at NASA, parenthetically, a reporter one time asked me how I felt about something, and I said, think of me as Spock. So, who cares who was first? Someone had to be first. Why celebrate that person in particular? But what happened after Apollo 11 and how Neil dealt with it for the entire rest of his life gives us, in my view, far better reasons to honor him than for making one good landing and taking a short walk afterward. So let's start by realizing that any of the Apollo commanders could have been selected for Apollo 11. Flight Operations Chief Deke Slayton had identified his potential Apollo mission commanders, all of them very talented pilots and leaders, before any Apollo missions had been flown, and Deke told me that himself. Any of them could have done it. He didn't pick anybody who couldn't have done it. And indeed, if things had not gone just right on Apollos 7 through 10, it might well have been another of the commanders who would have been first to set foot upon the moon. Neil knew that as well as anyone. He knew that it could have been any of them. So why honor him? So let's start by considering what it was like to be Neil Armstrong both before and after Apollo 11. So to do that, we need to go back a few years, quite a few years. So in your boyhood, you're Neil Armstrong. You're a child in an era in which America is pioneering the art and science of flight and is doing so better than any other nation. You fall in love with flight, as many of us have, and you want to design airplanes. You realize that being a pilot would be a big help, and it is. So you work hard to master the technical subjects that allow you to master flight, as well as the athletic and mechanical skills that are also necessary. And you do well with that. You find you have a talent for it. You work hard, and that never hurts, but you do have a talent for it, and not everyone does. In due course, you survive flight training, which not everyone does. Later, you survive Navy flying and carrier landings, which even in peacetime, not everyone does. But it's not peacetime. The Korean War is on, and you're assigned to the carrier Essex. On one mission, a bombing run in an F-9F Panther at 350 miles an hour and 500 feet altitude, you hit a cable strung between hills as a defense against just such missions. But despite losing 6 feet of your wing and an aileron, you managed to get your airplane out of enemy territory, eject safely, and go on to fly combat for another 6 months, surviving 78 combat missions in all. 27 other Essex flyers do not. After the war, you finish college at Purdue and then go to test pilot school, and you survive that. And again, not everyone does. By this time, you've passed through quite a few filters, but a bit later, you pass through another one. You're selected to be part of the X-15 program, where you are acknowledged by your peers, not just as a pilot, but as a contributor to the engineering, the design of the flight tests, and the conduct of the missions. You're part of a program that ran for 11 years and flew 199 missions, the most advanced aeronautical research program ever conducted in many ways, also the first real space program. And you made it there on your merits. It goes on. You're selected as a member of the second group of astronauts, a group that many consider to be the most highly qualified group of pilot astronauts NASA ever selected, again on your merits. Then you're selected to command Gemini 8, the first mission to dock with another spacecraft and a crucial step in getting to the moon by means of the lunar orbit rendezvous architecture that had been developed by guys like me. The nerds in the back room. On this mission, you encounter the first spaceflight emergency, the loss of control of your spacecraft because a thruster gets stuck in the on position, which you do not and cannot know at the time. Dealing with roll rates approaching 1 revolution per second and nearing your physical limits, you manage to regain control, stabilize the spacecraft, and bring it home in the first emergency return from space. To borrow, for the history majors in the room, to borrow a phrase from the Duke of Wellington about the Battle of Waterloo, and I'm quoting, "It was a very close run thing. It was the closest run thing you ever saw in your life. But you survive, and not everyone would have." A bit later, you're selected as one of the Apollo lunar mission commanders. Along the way, and as if all that has gone before is not enough, you survive an accident in which the lunar landing training vehicle goes out of control. You eject from the broken machine with, in the judgment of anyone who has seen the video record, maybe 1 second to spare. Maybe. Just to recall all of this gives any pilot more than a little pause for thought. You not only have to be very good, you also have to be a bit lucky. And then finally, you land on the moon, despite program alarms telling you that the onboard computer is overloaded, despite the fact that the guidance system is taking you into a boulder field and you're running out of fuel. But as you relate to a friend many years later, the spacecraft was still flying okay. So you keep going and you make it down. The Eagle has landed. And after that, you make it home. Hardly anticlimactic, even though that part has been done before. Now, up to this point, everything you've done, the whole pattern of your life has been based on achievement and on merit. You've earned your way. You've stood out among your peers, maybe not clearly better than every single one of them at every single thing, because it is a very highly select and talented group. But certainly you've distinguished yourself. But now, for the first time, when you come home, people want to be with you, want to have you as part of their enterprise, want to interact with you, and all because of what you did, not because of what you can still do as an engineer and a pilot and a leader. You're surrounded by people. Some of them will be great people, but you're also surrounded by people whose motives, whose events, whose enterprises could be suspect. How do you know whom to trust? How do you know who could become a friend for life and who just wants to use you for the fame you've attained? How do you know what to stand behind, what to endorse, what to champion, and what to stay away from? How do you handle yourself for the entire remainder of your life when everyone wants a piece of you? Neil gave us a lesson for the last 43 years of his life with hardly a misstep on how to do that. With dignity and style and grace and tact and charm and poise and a tremendous amount of tasteful intelligence about where to appear and where not to appear, with whom to appear and with whom not to appear. His conduct every day for 4 decades offers a model for every single one of us. Do not promote yourself. It is not about you. It is about the mission and the team. The responsibility may be yours if you're the boss or the leader, but the credit belongs to others. The errors belong to you, the credit belongs to others. You are not special. Know your principles and stay true to them. Neil lived for the rest of his life in this modest, self-effacing manner, reflecting credit on the organization, NASA, that selected him to go to the moon and that he served so well. I was looking for something with which to deflect that discomfort, And so I butted in and said, Neil, I know everybody who's been to the moon. I said, I only know a few people who've been X-15 pilots. I said, why don't you tell us about that? And he lit up, big grin, and he started talking about the X-15 for the rest of the evening. And it was just marvelous, because the X-15 program is one of the best things the nation has ever done. And the people who brought it about and who flew in it were very special people. And Neil loved talking about it, and he loved talking about flying. And it wasn't that he minded talking about flying, he just didn't want to talk all the time about being the first guy to go to the moon. And that was a fun evening. I remember another time we were, I think we testified together on stuff about space 3 times, if I recall correctly, and I may not, but I think 3 times we testified together. One time we were up on the Hill, and Senator McCain, then Senator McCain, now late Senator McCain, who was always a bit of a trial for me. I don't have a lot of fans, and he was not one of them. Came running over, and he sees Neil. And he says, Neil, and of course they were both former Navy pilots and all of that. And he sees Neil, and he wants to talk to him. And he doesn't even notice that I'm there. And it was so great. So he talks to Neil for a little while, and Neil says, well, we've got to get inside because we have to testify. And he says, oh, yeah, okay. So we're walking in, and I said to Neil, I said, I love being up here on the Hill with you because nobody pays any attention to me. And any attention paid to me was unlikely to be good. So that was great. And he says, well, I'm glad to be of service. People who thought that Neil did not have a sense of humor or that he was, excessively taciturn or a recluse, didn't have the opportunity to know him. If he liked and trusted you, he was as good a friend as you could ever want to have. I'll close with this final remembrance. A different time when we were testifying, he came. I was in the chamber a little bit early, as I usually had to do, in order to make the rounds of the congressmen and make sure that they were getting their proper amount of attention. Actually, I had to give them far more than their proper amount of attention. So Neil came trotting in, and he says, Mike, I got to show you this CD. I just got it in the mail from an amateur astronomer named Michael Marcus. And it turned out, to make a very long story short, that this amateur astronomer had gone through all the math to take the Apollo 11 lunar lander trajectory and map it into a modern-day map of the moon that we had gathered in my time at NASA, that we had gathered from Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter with a resolution of about 3 feet as opposed to the 10 or 20 meter resolution you would see in the video cameras of the landing. Plus, in the video cameras of the landing that were looking out, they were from a camera behind the pilot's head and looking through a fairly small window that wasn't small if you were up close to it, but it looked small from a camera positioned way behind your head. So nobody who's ever seen any of the Apollo lunar landing footage has a good impression of what it was really like to see out. Well, this guy had mapped the interior of the lunar module onto the math of the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter photos and superimposed all of that on the trajectory of the lander, which we knew, and the net result was exactly the view that the pilots could see out the window. It was awesome. And so Neil came running over. He says, Mike, I got to show you this. So he shows me through it, and one of the memories that I hope I will carry to my grave is Neil Armstrong walking me as a fellow and much more experienced pilot through his experiences of landing the first lunar lander on the moon. And he says, see, these are the boulders that I could see that were bothering me as we were coming down right into that boulder field. And so I had to really scoot over to get past them. And, you know, this was the flat spot, the only flat spot I could find, and here it was. And so I decided I was going to go for that. And, you know, just taking me through his thinking. And so at one point I said, well, you know, you were down to 20 or 30 seconds of fuel, and nobody will ever know exactly how much. The fuel gauge wasn't that good. I said, you were down to 20 or 30 seconds of fuel, and what were you thinking? And he said, well, two things. He said, first of all, I was down low enough that the design of the lander was such that even if we had to fall some distance, we were probably going to be okay. And then he says, you know, I can do a lot in 20 seconds. It was a great comment. So with that, I'll close. Yeah, I've used more than the 15 minutes Carolyn was going to give me. I hope it was okay. I'll just close by saying that it is true for all of us that nobody is guaranteed one more day. Whether you're 22 or 92, you're not guaranteed one more day. Neil wasn't, and he knew that. And given the profession that he was in, making it to 82 years old was not the bet you'd make when he was 22. So he did okay. But the fact that he only got 82 years is sad, at least for me, because it's been 11 years now, and I miss him still. And I think I always will. He was an awesome friend. Thanks for hearing me tonight. Thanks for being here. Appreciate the opportunity.